So, hello everyone, and welcome to this event. My name's Brett Bligh. I'm going to be the chair of the event, and I'm also one of the editors of the special issue and one of the co-directors of the Centre for Technology Enhanced Learning. I'll start by setting out a few ground rules, which are fairly simple and straightforward for those who've been in many Zoom meetings before, but nonetheless, they're worth saying anyway. So this event's going to be recorded, and the idea is that the recording will be made publicly accessible later. So for that reason, if you really don't want to appear in the recording, then you should turn off your webcam and microphone. And if you want to ask any questions, you can do so in the chat and I can read them out for you. Otherwise, we actually encourage you to keep your camera on because it's useful for speakers to know that they're not speaking to what sort of feels like an empty room. But do please turn off your microphone unless you're specifically intending to speak. Otherwise, we can get sort of strange interference effects with this many people in the same meeting. There'll be various points at which you can ask questions. If you do want to ask questions, please say so in the chat in the first instance. Because of the way this event's being recorded, if you use the function to raise your hand, it is possible that I won't be able to see it if you're off the bottom of my screen. So the safest mechanism is just to say in the chat, I have a question to ask. And I can either call you or I can read your question out for you as appropriate. The event's going to run for about 2 hours. Obviously, that's a fair amount of time, so you'll be happy to know we have scheduled a comfort break for what we hope is around halfway through. And those are the ground rules. I hope they're fairly straightforward. This event is really operating at I suppose, the nexus of a few different things. The first is that the Department for Educational Research at Lancaster University is running an ongoing series of events celebrating international collaboration. And this is one of those events. It's perhaps the fourth event or so we've run this month, and these events are continuing to run over the coming, perhaps going on for another 3 months. And if you look at the department's website, you can see the schedule of events in case you're interested to attend any of the others in future. This is also an event within the Meet and Eat series of the Centre for Technology Enhanced Learning at Lancaster University, where we meet with authors to discuss their papers. Typically, we actually read all the papers beforehand, although in this case, there are a sufficient number of those. I suspect that won't have actually happened. But nonetheless, we're engaging with specific papers and trying to get at the motivations and reasons that authors had for writing the papers. And also, this is a launch event for a special issue of the open access online journal Studies in Technology Enhanced Learning. This is the second issue of that journal, which has been edited by Rob Miles, Sebah Al-Ali, Brett Bligh, Tendai Charles, and Christopher Hill. All of whom you will see at some point during this event, and which has 11 full-length articles, 3 commentaries and an editorial, as you can see at the bottom of the screen from quite a few authors. And many of those people will be talking about their papers over the next couple of hours. If you'd like to tweet about this event while it's ongoing, you can see that there is a hashtag for the ongoing series of celebrating international collaboration events, that the journal has its own Twitter account, and that there are Twitter accounts for both Lancaster and the British University in Dubai team. And that's worth pointing out. So this is about celebrating international collaboration. And this journal issue is a collaboration between the Centre for Technology Enhanced Learning at Lancaster University in the UK and the Centre for Research in Digital Education at British University in Dubai. And you'll hear more about that shortly. So moving on to the next part of the event, it's still me. The schedule for the event is as follows. First of all, we're going to have a brief outline of the 2 centres out of whose collaboration this issue has arisen. Then we'll have a presentation about TEL in the MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa region. There'll be an introduction to the special issue and its structure, and then we will have overviews of some of the papers from those authors who are able to be here today. That during that period is where the comfort break will occur, and there'll be a plenary discussion at the end. So that's just so that you kind of know what to expect. So I'm going to start by talking about the research centre that I co-direct along with Kyungmi Lee at Lancaster University, who's also present here today. So the centre that I direct, the Centre for Technology Enhanced Learning, is a hub for research and practice in technology enhanced learning. So what we're known for, I suppose, is critical investigations of how technology enhanced learning happens in real settings. So as opposed to other research centres that do things like designing technology or lab experiments, and there are many of those, and that work is very valuable. But what we do is we look at how real technologies are really used in real educational institutions, as opposed to focusing on novel test beds. Our general statement of intent is to focus on theoretical and practical challenges related to educational uses of technologies for teaching and learning in formal and informal educational settings. We have a structure which involves a small core team of around 8 people. Most of those are drawn from the Department of Educational Research at Lancaster University. We have associate members from other departments in the university and at other universities who we work closely with. We have alumni members who've previously obtained their doctorates with us and continue to work with us, and current people undertaking their thesis work who want to be a member of the centre. And if you add all of those up, it comes to, I don't know, just over 60 people, I think. So that's who we are. And the reality is it's quite a diverse group of people with quite a lot of different backgrounds, and not just from educational research, but from computer science, management, medical schools, linguistics, practitioners who are doing doctorates to become researchers, and so on and so on. So in actual fact, we want to celebrate that diversity of focus, interest, expertise. But of course, what it does mean is we have to think a little bit explicitly about what unites us as a centre, what brings us together. And so a couple of years ago, we had a collective exercise to kind of think about that and to think about what our collective priorities are. And we came up with the 3 themes that you can see on the slide. So ultimately, we see our work as being oriented around these themes: inclusivity, pedagogy, and learning, a focus on real change and what that actually means. There's a lot of rhetoric around technology enhanced learning. It's a very kind of heavily marketed kind of phenomenon, or sometimes quite hyperbolically. And we see ourselves as understanding what change is really happening and what implications that has for many of the stakeholders, because technology is often sold as bringing more people in, and we want to understand the reality of that. We have a specific focus on theory and research. So we research research. We research what is the technology enhanced learning field? What does it focus on? Where does it come from? What kind of theories does it use, etc.? Because technology enhanced learning as a field has had a history of being a bit reactive over a considerable period of time. And that's collectively, we feel, a bit of a problem. And we focus on mobility, time and space, which is about how technology affects how, where and when people engage in education, and how the settings they engage in education from actually influences how people use technology. So technology is a product of specific backgrounds, but it's often imported into quite different settings, and it works there in ways quite different from how its creators imagine. So our core activities, we have 2 main series of events. The Meet and Eat series, which is basically people discussing papers with their authors, and actually we're badging this event as one of those. The Show and Tell events, which are capacity development workshops for the field. So we focus on things like peer review, research time management, how to write pieces for kind of op-ed pieces for public audiences and so on. And we do host other occasional events. And if you're not so far a member of the centre, I'd just like to say that those events are all publicly available. So we do have a fair few people who attend from other places, and they're very welcome. If you want to find out what's coming in the future, we have a Twitter account. And if you want to see the things that we've done in the past, at least in the last couple of years, you can look at our YouTube channel where many of the recordings of these events are available, and this one should be added there in due course. Probably one thing we're known for very much is a doctoral program, a structured doctoral program called e-Research and Technology Enhanced Learning, which is one of the biggest doctoral programs in the field. So it's been going for nearly 15 years and takes in about between 25 and 30 students a year. It is done part-time. Students take 2 years and then to do training modules, and then they do their thesis. And many of those students are not working from the UK. So if you want to understand why it is that the Centre for Technology Enhanced Learning might have such a strong interest in the MENA region, well, one reason is that we spend a lot of effort supervising projects and then collaborating after that with alumni members who are in the MENA region. So we're a very international network, and a lot of that has been sort of stimulated by our doctoral program, which is highly international. We also bring together a range of networks, including the present journal that we're talking about today. And we're also heavily involved in an international, very established research community called Network Learning, which runs a major international conference every 2 years and a number of events around its periphery. So I hope that gives a fair overview of one of the two centres that is at the heart of the collaboration that we're celebrating today. And now I'd like to hand over to Tendai, who's going to talk about the Centre for Research in Digital Education.
All right, thank you for that, Brett. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us all today. I'm Tendai Charles, Director of the Centre for Research in Digital Education here at the British University in Dubai. We are a relatively small team in comparison to the team they have there in Lancaster. It's essentially just myself, Dr. Christopher Hill, who is here with us today, and Professor Iman Gad, who is also Dean of the Faculty of Education. We launched our centre in January last year because we're all passionate about research related to e-learning, and we had a feeling that at some point in the near future, online learning would become a reality in the UAE. Little did we know that 2 months away, the pandemic was awaiting us. And so, yes, everything went online, obviously. And so we went from a small team with not much support at the university to actually receiving lots of funding and being a go-to spot for advice and guidance. And so we're involved in a number of research projects pertaining to e-learning. Here in Dubai now, we're seeing very creative hybrid and blended learning models being established. And so we're collaborating on research about that, as well as assessments online, and also how to actually conduct observations in the online context as well. So we're involved in a number of projects at the moment. We also host regular events. We try to spread best practice based on research in the region. So we have a number of webinars and seminars that we host. We're also teaching a Masters in Education program dedicated towards education technology, as well as a doctorate in education, also focused specifically on e-learning. We're very passionate about digital inclusion and how to support students with special needs in an online environment. We were involved in a number of projects on that last year, and actually we were awarded by Blackboard Ally as being leaders in the region on digital inclusion. And we've also been drawn into a number of consultancy projects. So there's a number of schools that need guidance and private institutions who need guidance on things like how to write e-learning policies and how to train their faculty to teach online in the most effective ways. We've formed some partnerships with institutions such as Pearson in the region and Coursera, and we're very proud of our collaboration with Brett Bligh and his team at Lancaster. It's amazing to see how dedicated they are and how hardworking they are and how their reach is so global. And so we really enjoyed working on this project with them, and we're proud to have this, this journal published today. So thank you all for coming, and I look forward to seeing the speeches by the authors. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks, Brett, thanks Tendai. I'm Rob Miles, and I'm a currently a PhD student in Lancaster. I'm also an English language professional based in the UAE for quite a long time now. I'm going to give an overview of TEL, technology enhanced learning in the region. And I think we'd agree that TEL is a deeply contextualized phenomenon, socio-culturally, historically, economically, and so on. Particularly true here. There's a rich history of initiatives taking place that are in a region that's at the same time sort of very particular, but also globally connected. Part of that global connection, of course, is oil, which is the primary source of income for many countries in the region. However, as these countries seek to move from oil reliant to knowledge economies, there's been a major investment in education. I mean, one thing about governments in this region is that they really do put their money where their mouth is. And this heavy investment in education has been coupled with an equally heavy investment in technology. There are, of course, many examples from across the region. In Saudi, there's the Takwir Smart Schools. You've got the King Hamad project for future schools in Bahrain, and similar initiatives in the Oman. Just some examples there. Technology is seen as the key element in reforming and modernizing education. I'm sure that's a quote that Brett will have seen in many people's papers from the region. Another thing that's been very common in MENA is device initiatives. I know for a fact, seeing the names here, that many of the people will have been involved in the massive iPad initiative from 2012. If you're not aware of this saw 14,000 students in the federal universities issued with this famous tablet computer, and it then sort of rolled down into the K-12 system. In 2016, Oman has been launching a similar thing with the national telecom provider, which has given them a number of tablets which have been spread across high schools in the country. Of course, now sort of device agnosticism is much more the norm, but classrooms are still smart. Students and teachers are still linked up to learning management systems, and the future of education, I think, is very firmly invested in technology. And of course, COVID has only intensified this. Now, as well as these national initiatives that might be well reported on, there's a huge amount of TEL practice taking place at the level of the institution or the level of the department, or even more so at the individual teacher level with their own students and classrooms. And I feel that this special issue is starting to capture that important research and practice that's taking place. Now, I think this combination of political will and the investment, combined with big commitment at the practitioner level, creates a really interesting context. It makes the region a real area of interest where the practice of TEL across education sectors is concerned. The final point I'd like to make, and it's one that perhaps we don't often think about, is that the education systems in the region are often or usually based on a Western imported model, and in many cases are taught in English. And this has led to an influx of expatriate education professionals, some from within the MENA region themselves, but also from the wider world. And I think the journal issue reflects that in where the authors come from. This multicultural group is perhaps importing its own TEL practices, its own pedagogies, its own beliefs into these classrooms. So we don't just have this Western model, but we have the individual ideas that are coming in to the practice as well. And I think it's this rich context that the special issue is aiming to explore. It's the vast experience, the expertise that exists within this region. And the papers, I feel, here are a reflection of this. So I hope you'll enjoy reading them as much as I have. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think this is my cue. Hi, everyone. I'm Sebah, and it's nice to have you here. It's nice to be part of this. Before I start, I just wanted to ask, and I just wanted to see, how many of you are based in the MENA region? Can I just have a thumbs up or a yes in the chat box? I want to see. Okay, nice. Oh, we have a good number. Nice. Okay. And I'm sure many of you have attempted or tried to do research in the region and about the practices in the region. That's not Okay, great. Thanks. I don't know if you have similar experiences to mine, but I thought maybe I'd share my story first and why I feel this issue is very close to heart. Not to sound like a nerd, but I mean, why I'm really proud of this this issue. Growing up in the region, I did my undergraduate studies here. When I tried to do my research assignments, it wasn't always an easy task for me to find a good number of publications or resources that or research projects that focus on TEL practices in the region or offer a critical analysis of TEL applications. So I always, at that time, struggled a lot with finding something relevant to the context that I'm researching or context that I'm growing up in. Surely this has been improving over the past few years, but it was very exciting for me to be part of a project that is contributing to this line of research. And for me, I feel this issue has offered researchers the opportunity to enrich and to contribute to this growing line of research and to help us, as Neil Selwyn famously said, to explore or to investigate the state of the actual, instead of just dreaming about what could possibly happen or how technology is always the answer to everything. We need to start being critically aware of how it is served or how it is applied in our region to be able to improve our practices and to become more critical of them. So this issue is like really special to me because of that, because it addresses this gap that I feel has always been there. Next slide, please. So when this call for issue came, this call for papers came out in around August, I think, we were mainly interested in papers or publications that were looking into how teachers and students use technology in their classrooms and what kind of challenges and opportunities they encounter in the process, and how do their institutions support these practices and these endeavors. And we were happily delighted. Next slide, please. As we got a good number of publications and contributions, and all of them, I'm proud to say, were double-blind peer-reviewed, which I believe is a great process that helps enrich the outcome. And we ended up with 11 full-length articles, all of which are, and 3 commentaries, all of which are excitingly trying to explore how TEL is practiced at different levels of the education system and in different areas. We tried to present them in a way that is, we tried to categorize them to offer a more synthesized layout. So we ended up with 4 themes. Next slide, please. The first theme being strategic issues for teaching. And we had 4 articles about that. And we also had the theme of introducing novel tools, next slide, please, and pedagogies. And supporting online and blended learning, and finally roles of technology in assessment. So as you can see, we had different themes and different issues, all of them exploring these topics from different areas. And I feel, I hope you find this issue to offer a glimpse of how TEL is practiced in the region, and it contributes to more issues and additions into the matter or about the region, about TEL practices in the region. So I hope you find them interesting, and I'm very excited that we have many of the authors today sharing their reflection and their experience writing these papers and doing these research projects. So thank you.
So, having had the introduction to the issue, we're now going to allow some of the authors to talk briefly about their papers. The idea is that each author is going to speak for about 5 minutes, and they'll be able to tell us something about their motivation, what the paper's really about, and what implications it might have for the region. We're going to follow roughly the order that Sebah just outlined. So we'll proceed in that order, and after the first cluster, we'll have the break. So if you are an author of one of the papers, we have about 80% of the papers represented. Obviously, when you're scheduling an event like this, not everyone can make it, but about 80% of the authors are here today. So if you see we'll be going in the order in which the papers appear in the issue. Once you see your title slide, if you're the author, please do turn on your webcam and microphone and start talking. Please do try and make it about 5 minutes, otherwise I'm going to have to develop a nasty cough in the attempt to tell you to stop. So let's begin. The running order will look something like this, and you can see where the comfort break is going to come. So we'll begin with the first cluster, which is on strategic issues for teaching.
Okay, thank you, Brett. Hi, everybody. Congratulations to the editors, first of all, for this second STEL edition. It really looks amazing. And yeah, I'm just really happy to be part of it. And also Ramadan Kareem to everybody in the region. My name is Zoe Hurley, and I'm a Technology Enhanced Learning alumna, and I'm based in Dubai at Zayed University, and I'm the Assistant Dean for Student Affairs in the College of Media and Communications. So my paper was titled Dialogic Theorizing of Emirati Women's TEL in the UAE. And the paper collated a corpus of TEL scholarship that had been published in the UAE over the last 10 years. And I took the UAE as a microcosm indicative of other Gulf states. And this is in terms of the huge population of so-called migrant and expat workers who make up 80% of the population and spend, you know, many people spend their whole lives here, raise their children here, and there are generations of residents or non-citizens. The UAE, like other nations in the region, are dependent one way or another on oil and gas and share the quest to become a knowledge-based economy. Now, you know, like Sebah, when I was carrying out my PhD, I wanted to find literature coming from the region. And what I found is a lot of the literature coming from outside of the region, and, you know, at a superficial level, like articles in The Guardian, but also certain scholars like critical pedagogists like Henry Giraud were very disdaining of the UAE, and they often describe Dubai as a kind of hyper-modern, glitzy hallucination that reminds me of Fritz Lang's Metropolis, the kind of 1927 black and white movie that's all alienation and dislocation. And in fact, Henry Giraud calls Dubai in one of his articles the temple of capitalism, and uses the phrase the theatre of cruelty. Another scholar and architect, Henry Delarue, says that Dubai is a mirage and that it's a postmodern, superficial simulacrum. So, you know, many people kind of perceive the region through those perspectives, but I think anyone living here might be experiencing it in a slightly different way. And there are a lot of local writers who are coming up. And in particular, there's a local Emirati writer called Rana Al-Mutawa, who reminds us that Dubai, the UAE and the Gulf are very much lived and embodied places, albeit of multiple belongings. However, in some of the TEL literature, but not all, this sense of multiple belongings, different perspectives and experiences was generally nascent. Next slide, please. So my objective was to develop a dialogic framework to conceive of the multiplicity of experiences in TEL scholarship in the UAE. And I wanted to consider what was written in as well as written out, and to what effect. Now, this idea of writing in, writing out is underpinned by a dialogic perspective, as I've suggested, and this does not assume a binary of voice versus silence. Rather, it conceives of multiple perspectives, languages, ethnicities, classes, mixing and coexisting in the transnational context that is UAE, which is a mix of language, people, cultures, and experiences. So I drew on the dialogic perspective of the Russian formalist, Mikhail Bakhtin, and in particular, I looked at his definition of genre. And he very simply defined genre as in terms of the structure, the content, and the form or the style, and the interrelationships between these aspects of a genre and how they shape one another. So in the 10 articles that I looked at, I just asked these 3 simple questions, these dialogic questions about the structure, the content, and the form of the articles, and the way that they come together as a wider typology or a body of TEL literature in the UAE. So in terms of findings, I wasn't so concerned with specific representational findings. I was more interested in kind of reorientations. And certainly some of the articles that I read were highly dialogic and really did discuss the complexities and contradictions of Emirati women's lives, for example, and for many of people living in the UAE, their lives are caught somewhere between like the push and pull of modernity and tradition. I also found that, as I started off myself as an ESL, English as a second language teacher, and there does seem to be an overdetermination of a focus on English as a second language, despite the fact that many educators, we've got multiple voices going on now. It's great. It's adding to the dialogism in some ways. That's not intentional. But the thing is, as people have mentioned so far, many of the educators in the region speak different languages, not necessarily English or even Arabic, and there are many variations and dialects of Arabic, but a number of people also speak Farsi, Hindi, Urdu, Tagalog. There's a whole list of daily languages that people speak and mix. And nobody really seems to consider that, although there are some people in other areas, but not necessarily TEL. Another kind of pattern that is evident elsewhere in TEL literature is the kind of neoliberal mold shaping TEL. And in terms of the Bakhtin's idea of genre, we could see quite formulaic structures to articles. In terms of language, a lot of the vocabulary seemed to come from the semantic field of business. So we see lots of buzzwords like capitalizing, investing, optimizing, richness, assets. And these words, these are business words that are used to talk about learners, learning, people. And obviously, it's quite dehumanizing. And in terms of content as well, I feel that because people don't read so much anymore, I guess, there's a shift towards this very digestible content that's kind of bite-size, cookie cutter approach. And I in the past, I've been involved in producing this kind of writing. And I talk quite critically about an article that I wrote in the past that's quite a formulaic idea of learning that flattens ambiguity and different perspectives. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, sorry, yeah, this is the right one. Okay, overall, I really hope that a dialogic framework could help all of us to think about the implications of who is written in and out of scholarship and why certain voices are heard and why there are certain silences. Living in the region, I'm well aware, like many here, that being a non-citizen in the country, as many of us are, means that what you can say and you can write is very much constrained, and anybody living here is aware of that. Nevertheless, I think it really is time to reevaluate Western centrism and narratives of exceptionalism about the region and ultimately Orientalism that dismisses the Gulf, that dismisses the Middle East, and doesn't acknowledge and recognize the hybridity of where we are. I think that one of the greatest challenges to neoliberalism is multiplicity and dialogism. And therefore, I think we've got to start talking more about the variations of neoliberalisms and the different experiences and voices of learners and everyone involved in learning. Okay, thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for that amazing work, Zoe. And hi, I'm Pamela Johnson. I am a learning consultant with Pearson Middle East. And the best part of my job is talking with educators all across the region. And so I wrote a very short comment on, let's see, current conditions. And I hope that my comment offers a real world view and some perspective. So in my observation, even before the pandemic struck, educators often expressed a wish to become better or to further develop their skills in 21st century skills integration, in engagement, and in assessment. But then when the pandemic took hold, of course, all of these things that we always wanted to do better at became acute. And so that exposed a need to think and act and learn differently than we ever have before. So one strategic tool that can address all of these concerns in terms of assessment, engagement, and 21st century skills integration is instructional design. So let us conversationally call instructional design the creation of a learning experience in any context, online, face-to-face, hybrid, simultaneous, blended. It is essentially the creation of a learning experience. And so I think supporting educators in creating more, better learning experiences that would work in any context could be extremely powerful in addressing our current challenges. So one way that institutions and leaders can support educators is by creating or expanding instructional design for instructional design for faculty. So that could mean hiring more instructional designers in a teaching and learning center. So educators and learning designers can collaborate to create a better experience. Another way of increasing the reach of instructional design is offering educators professional development in instructional design. So I think that thinking strategically about institutional resources and institutional structure in terms of can we get more instructional design support for our faculty, and also thinking more strategically about professional development and making a plan for how it's going to impact instruction now in the future can be transformative in my opinion. So instructional design can help us deliver better learning experiences and better outcomes today and tomorrow in any conditions and in any context. So that is a quick look at my comment for this issue. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so I'm Karl Coutet. I lead a school here in Medina, Saudi Arabia, and currently a EdD student with the University of Bath. Just to give some context, my paper is a commentary, a case study of one school in the region, the school that I last worked at, and how it dealt with the sudden announcement of online learning. It may be surprising to people not in the Middle East to know that we've been doing online learning, synchronous lessons, live online sessions for pretty much a year and a half now. And when the announcement was made, as is common in Saudi Arabia, the Ministry of Education announced that online learning will happen from tomorrow. It happened at night time, so we got the call, and then we had to plan very quickly of how we're going to do something that we've never done before. So the next day, I met with my senior leadership team, and we talk about this in the paper, and chose a tool at first. Chose a platform of what to conduct the lessons on. Luckily enough, our platform failed during that test. I say luckily enough because other schools that had chosen the same platform found that it failed the following week when they were teaching classes. We were lucky to have it fail when we were testing it and then choose a different platform. So the paper basically outlines how we dealt with crisis, how we measured how well we were dealing with that crisis, and what lessons could be taken forward and changes could be made for when that crisis is able to be planned for a little bit better and thought about a little bit better. So essentially, we talk about the stages of how we trained our staff and got them ready for teaching online, 6 lessons a day of synchronous online lessons. Essentially, it was by workshops. Well, firstly, by a strong induction to get everyone talking the same language. What we found was that people didn't really know the terminologies that were involved in online learning. I got used to saying synchronous and asynchronous now, but when first saying it a year ago, no one knew what I was talking about. So the strong induction, getting everyone talking the same language was important. And before that, and this can be carried over to dealing with any crisis, knowing your team, knowing their experiences by talking to them, knowing their strengths and weaknesses, because what we discovered was that we had people that had been teaching online for years, whether it be tutoring students to take IG exams or whatever it was. We have had teachers teaching online. And so we were able to pull on that, strong human resource of experience to help us with ideas of how to best provide for our students in the school, and also as a resource for training our lesser experienced colleagues with this situation. So after the workshop style training, I describe in the paper how we moved on to doing more peer-to-peer training. So assigning lesser experienced colleagues with mentors, and then having observations, peer observations after that. I say lesser experienced colleagues, often they were actually the most experienced colleagues in the faculty when it comes to teaching face-to-face, but with the online experience, all of a sudden things were flipped, in that the lesser experienced colleagues face-to-face became the ones that were most experienced in online learning, and vice versa. Underlying that whole process was measuring impact. So what I speak about in the paper is the tool that was developed to measure impact. Now, unfortunately, we didn't measure impact of learning, so it wasn't measuring the impact with the students, but rather measuring the impact of what we wanted to see implemented from our training. Things like student engagement and maximizing opportunities for interaction. So I described the process of how we designed that tool, and the fact that it was in crisis meant that the tool had no piloting, and the tool was good enough in order for us to measure that our teachers did improve in what we targeted for them to improve in. The end of the paper looks at the future, which really right now is the present, because when we ended last academic year, we went into a summer holiday. And even though our online provision was well received by parents, it made our parental satisfaction go much higher than it was in the previous semester, because of how well we did, the good job we did with providing us that online provision. Everything that was designed in a rush without much research the tool that we designed to assess online online lesson observations was all done without much research basis and done quickly. And even though it worked, it doesn't mean that it is necessary to continue with what's working, because it worked for the time it was in, which was crisis time. And so, although lessons can be taken from what was learned in crisis, it's a warning that when you come to have more time to plan ahead for a longer term provision like we had this year, a whole academic year of online learning, to take a step back and do the research again and look at what best practice is coming out from across the different range of researchers looking at it. And that is my paper in a nutshell in the 5 minutes, I think.
Hello, my name is Rasha Essam. I'm educational technology consultant and e-learning service provider. My paper is about exploring the needs of teachers in Middle East University using TPAC, a case study. The motivation for conducting this study was that teachers are still resistant to integrate technology in teaching, although they attend different workshops for that purpose. So the research question was, what forms of knowledge do teachers prefer their trainers to have in order to integrate technology effectively in their teaching, and why? So the theoretical framework that I used here is technological, pedagogical, and content knowledge. And in order to answer this question, I created a visual tool that has certain design principles. For example, representing technology trainers in the form of avatars so that teachers can reflect on freely without relating them to actual trainers. In addition, that is culturally appropriate in order not to make them embarrassed to talk freely about the trainers. In addition, transforming complex concepts into examples, adding an example button to the same screen that presents the trainer's knowledge. The findings were as follows. It was found that perceived knowledge of content is a key determinant of how much teachers want to engage with given members of support staff, the trainers. In addition, teachers recognize the needs for a variety of different support stakeholders, but wish to relate to such people in different ways, for example, through training courses, workshops, or ad hoc approaches to fill in the gaps in their knowledge. In addition, it was found that there were certain reasons for preferring certain trainers, and there were other reasons for not choosing certain trainers. The reasons for preferring certain trainers were content knowledge plays a significant role in choosing to engage with a trainer. Knowledge of technology used for teaching specific content helps in choosing to engage with the trainer. And knowledge of both technology and pedagogy help in choosing to engage with the trainer. And finally, knowledge of technology only is not enough for choosing to engage with the trainer. For the reasons for not choosing certain trainers, it was found that lack of trainers' pedagogical experience, lack of trainers' knowledge in content and pedagogy, and technological knowledge only is not enough. So the implications here for this study through these findings, technology training designers can take into consideration that the design principles related to the reasons regarding preferring certain trainers and reasons for not choosing certain trainers in order to take teachers' needs into consideration before designing, developing, or implementing any professional development programs. In addition, policymakers can also take these findings into consideration and make sure that the trainer's knowledge about the subject domain of teachers is essential for having effective technology trainings, and therefore change their policies in order to reach the better outcomes. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we appear to be actually on time. I'm not sure how that happened. It's certainly not usual for these kind of things, but we do appear to have actually arrived at the last presentation around 5 minutes before the halfway point. So this is where we've scheduled the comfort break to happen. So we hope that you can rejoin us by my clock at around past. So you'll notice, given the number of time zones we're dealing with here, I'm not saying half-past what, but if you rejoin in 5 minutes, that would be very welcome, and we will consider the next 3 blocks of the issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, hello again, everyone. I'm going to make the potentially dangerous guess that people are back. So let's continue with the next part of the presentation. We'll consider the remaining 3 clusters within the special issue and then go to the plenary. Okay, so next we'll consider the cluster on introducing novel tools and pedagogies. I think we're going to start with Monique first.
Can I get started?
Yes, would you like? Yes, please do.
Sure, great. Okay, thank you, Brett. I want to say thanks to the journal editors and the conveners of the session. It's really an honor to join the range of voices from across the region for those of us thinking about teaching with technology, and especially teaching with technology in the time of pandemic. I want to talk a little bit about some student work that I produced in the time of teaching during pandemic, and my own journey as a campus leader to being a student to becoming a teacher again through all of this. I included in my piece a quote from Arundhati Roy, who wrote about the pandemic as a portal. And it's an essay that I would urge many people to check out. Roy essentially sees us at a moment where we're at a rupture in the world. The pandemic is a gateway between where we stand and a world beyond. And that this rupture gives us the time to really rethink many of the things in our lives and in the world. And I've organized my remarks today around these ideas of rupture and rethinking. The first rupture for me came in early March when here in the UAE, we had a quick mandate from the ministry to shift to remote learning. Because I work for a US-based university that's global, we have campuses in China, we had a little bit of a heads up that something was coming, but this was all rather hasty, the shift to remote learning. Yes, I'll share that link later on the chat function. Thank you. My biggest concern as a campus leader was that there were logistical challenges, but I was also worried about losing community as our campus and our classroom space disappeared. I know that for a lot of people around the world, this earliest period of remote learning could pretty much be summed up in one word, and that is yuck. I was also, just as an aside, as a mother, watching my daughter at the dining room table going through what looked like some awful sessions of Microsoft Teams, where she would end class looking like a cross between a rabid raccoon and a stoned zombie. And it was very frustrating for me, this period of what I was watching and what I was hearing about remote learning, because I'm one of those people who believes that good teaching and good learning can happen anywhere. With my team of faculty, I registered to join them in taking a webinar series on the fundamentals of online learning. I don't mind giving a plug for the course. It's called iDesign. There are many versions of this around, but what we learned was a concept called communities of inquiry, where we were focusing on a process of inquiry, not the tools of technology, but the process of inquiry that had connections to John Dewey's collaborative constructivist principles, and that essentially asked us to think about the space of learning as necessitating a teaching presence, a cognitive presence, and a social presence, a community of learners guided and connected and building and learning in a new form. Throughout these course modules, we were pushed to think about, in a new way, about our behavior as teachers, our expectations as teachers, the content we selected, the assessment models, varied learning styles, and the importance of active student learning and collaboration. And one thing that was really brought to our attention was that successful online and remote teaching had to show an integration of social, technological, and instructional practices. On our campus, following the guidance from our Center for Teaching and Learning, we have embraced a web-based tool called VoiceThread, another plug I don't mind making, to take advantage of the tools, the web platform's multi-sensory environment. For people who aren't familiar with VoiceThread, I'll just quickly describe, it's a bit like a PPT or a webinar that is very three-dimensional, can be asynchronous or synchronous, but essentially allows users to import and share video, voice, audio, text. Students, teachers, guests are able to upload media so that you've got this very rich environment. And because it can be asynchronous, you're building, designing, collaborating, commenting, editing together, so that the project is really an evolutionary design. By the time I finished this iDesign course with my own teachers, I felt like I was ready to do more rethinking about teaching with technology. And by the summer of 2020, I shifted to teach myself a hybrid remote literature course called Reading the Harlem Renaissance. Now, I had students, it was a history and a literature course. I had students at around the beginning of May reading about the end of the 19th century, early 20th century period in American history. And this was the week where George Floyd was murdered in the US. I arrived at a moment that is familiar to many teachers of color in the United States and maybe other parts of the world, where I wondered, can I simply soldier on with what I've prepared for class? Do I wall off my emotion from my intellect? Do I breach that line between being personal and staying professional? And I wondered that day, can I even make it through class without crying? So I rattled through the Zoom on this hybrid course, asking students, how are you doing? How are your families? And before I could really shift to, here's what we're going to work at today, one of the top students in the class asked me if we could talk about what had happened in the US. And those were her exact words, talk about what had happened in the US. Now, I had hoped that students would make a connection because we were studying the end of slavery, the rise of Jim Crow, lynching, and racial violence in the US. So I had actually taken the VoiceThread and created a mini lecture. I had included slides that were archival material from historic collections about the 1920s. And I had essentially created a course classroom design that day so that students could learn about a 1917 march that was put together by the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, called the Silent Protest, which was a response to lynching. I had included my lecture with voice, archival images, and then I also had a series of photos that were shots of the silent protest where marchers were dressed in white and they were carrying placards and protest posters because everything was quiet except for the bang of a drum. And I essentially asked my students to, the goal was to put them in the space of New York in 1917 and to ask them to take the lesson of this silent protest march and try to make connections with what they could see going on in the world that day of class and in the week of our own lesson. I asked them to create their own silent protest and let them spend the remainder of our class time working in small groups to use VoiceThread to create a virtual silent protest about the George Floyd uprisings. The student work that was produced absolutely blew me away. They came with audio, video, music, links to NGO and social protest organizations, through the images that they shared in their VoiceThread slides. They put themselves in collaboration with protesters who were students on other campuses in the US, Columbia, Berkeley, University of Michigan. They put themselves through the images they selected down and out in the streets of Paris and London with other protesters in the world. They located themselves with a fluid range of pronouns, evincing solidarity, empathy, collective outrage. They crossed time and space through the images they gathered to show me civil rights 1960s, Selma, Alabama, post-Rodney King, LA. And they even, in one instance, shared a slide of a rubble war-torn corner in Idlib in Syria where someone had painted a George Floyd mural. The assignment worked for my class because I could literally teach about a march in 1917 while there was marching going on in the world. But the fact that this exercise was a place where students could use technology to join the present and the past together and to liberate themselves from the fixed space of the classroom was really instructive and got me thinking more about teaching with technology. I made many notes after class that day in my own teaching and learning journal, and here's where I'll conclude. Learning is rooted and it's unbound. Learning is responsive and meets students where their hearts and minds are. Learning places students beyond the walls of a classroom. Learning can be local and global at the same time. Learning that sticks is creative and it's experiential and it's applied. I talk in my paper about other uses of VoiceThread for collaborative projects and role play with students, but I'll stop here now and I'm happy to talk about this and any other aspects of the paper as the webinar continues. Thanks.
So we're going to move on now to the next cluster, which is about supporting online and blended learning. And we have two of the papers here represented.
Thank you, Brett. Can you go back to the first slide? Oh, okay. Thank you. So before starting, I just want to take a few seconds to say thank you to you and to Kyungmi for creating this community of practice where we can feel that we're contributing to the ongoing conversation. And we miss being in Lancaster, but this is something that is really helpful for us to feel connected. My paper looks at students' perception of their engagement in the online and face-to-face component of an information literacy course. Next slide, please. The context here is, as you see, it's a branch campus of an American medical college. So our students come from local schools in Qatar, and these schools teach mainly in Arabic language, with barely any attention given to research and information literacy skills. The information literacy curriculum that was designed in our college aims at developing pre-medical students' basic research skills, strengthen their critical thinking abilities, and prepare them for becoming well-versed doctors and lifelong learners. I have been using the blended learning approach and the flipped classroom modality for several years now. And the reason why I use this approach, I find it easier to have access to students because our curriculum is very rigorous and intensive that we don't get too much class time with the students. So I switched to blended learning and I use the online modules and face-to-face sessions. Next slide, please. The literature has shown that the earlier an information literacy intervention occurs, the more impact it can have on students' ability to locate and access online resources, evaluate the information they find, and use evidence-based resources. In the local context where the study takes place, and as Rob has mentioned before, we are a transnational higher education institution, and our students come from local schools. So many schools here still follow the teacher-centered approach, which has therefore caused some difficulties for students transitioning into higher education, where we expect them to be self-directed and independent learners. And many studies also have argued the positive role of technology in helping students become self-directed and leveraging their engagement. And that's why I have decided to use the blended teaching approach, which turned out later to be a good teaching approach, looking at what the pandemic has created. Next slide, please. So I used a case study to investigate a phenomenon, which is student engagement in a blended online course, and to investigate it in depth and within its real life context. The survey uses a mix of Alfeld et al. Survey on student engagement and Dixon's online student engagement scale. It consisted of 9 questions that were divided into 3 concepts. I wanted to look at their behavioral engagement, their cognitive engagement, and their emotional engagement. Following the survey, 3 students participated in a one-on-one interview that addressed the changes that needs to be implemented in the IL curriculum, the additional skills that they think should be included, and the reason behind their preference of online modules over face-to-face. Next slide, please. Participants explained that the schedule of the face-to-face session was a little bit annoying for them because I was scheduled the first class in the early morning, and they didn't like the fact that they have to wake up early and come. That's why they were complaining about the face-to-face component. However, the interviewed participant considered that some practical skills necessitate the face-to-face sessions. Students also perceived themselves as engaged in the online component because they were arguing with me like, we're submitting our quizzes, we're submitting the assignments, we are checking the online component, so they think that they are engaged. And they preferred the asynchronous access to content. But however, some of them tend to procrastinate because they feel like we have access to the online component whenever we want, so we can check it anytime, and they subsequently fail to check the content. The face-to-face sessions provide a chance to interact with peers and collaborate as a tool to internalize the learning process, and also interact with the teacher or the instructor with whom they can ask questions pertaining to the learning material. Last slide, please. Instructors need to be selective as to what skills need face-to-face and what can be included in the online content for asynchronous access. Teaching in a medical school always leads to the assumption that we need to cover only scholarly academic topics. However, the results from the study provided an emerging interest in the use of social media in the future curriculum. For example, students suggested replacing the module on evaluating scholarly and popular resources with a module on evaluating social media tools and showing them good and bad examples of using social media. So the findings proved to be valuable, especially during these challenging times where beside the pandemic, there's the infodemic, or the major threat to scientific knowledge by fake news and the rushed conclusions that are not validated by evidence. Therefore, there is a need to prepare our students early on to become self-directed learners who can think for themselves. They can critically evaluate and use information to make decisions. Thank you.
Hi, and happy Ramadan, everyone. It's very nice to see you all here, actually. During this time, and it is very challenging for me to present without any caffeine or nicotine, so forgive my I will present this paper with my co-author Mohamed. I'm Hany Fazza, and I'm teaching Arabic at Georgetown University in Qatar. Georgetown University in Qatar is an American branch university in Qatar Foundation, where it offers a Bachelor of Science degree in foreign service, and we also teach 2 tracks of Arabic, one for non-native speakers and the other one for heritage learners. First, the context of this paper is that GUQ needs to identify how to increase student engagement in online and blended Arabic courses, especially during the first during March 2020, we received several complaints from both teachers and students regarding the engagement in online classes. Next slide, please. Yes, speaking of the theoretical framework and the research literature, this paper is based on the community of practice, the COI framework developed by Garrison et al. And we only present here our focus on the social presence element with the three sub-elements, which are the affective expressions, the open communication, and the group cohesion. We developed our open-ended questionnaire in light of the COI framework, and we also identified the literature of the challenges students face as regards their social engagement in online and blended learning contexts. However, there was a gap in the literature on student social engagement, especially in Arabic as a foreign language, and also Arabic for heritage students in online context in the Middle East under COVID-19. Our research objective in this, next slide, please, yes. Our research objective in this study, or we wanted to understand the key challenges faced our students in terms of the social presence dimension of the COI framework, also to gather insights into the range of solutions the students proposed based on their first-hand experience and perceptions. And finally, in light of these perceived challenges and solutions, to recommend some measures that may benefit our students, our instructors in similar education institution and context in the Middle East and beyond. And our research questions for this study, one was, what are the challenges that our students from this two tracks face regarding their engagement in the online learning context within the social presence dimension? And the second one is, what solutions are and recommendations our students propose for overcoming these challenges. Next slide. Now, I will give the floor to Mohamed.
Thank you, Hany, and thank you, everybody, especially, I mean, the two centers for giving us this great opportunity to publish part of our research on this topic. My name is Mohamed Mahgoub. I am a researcher in the Educational Development Institute in Qatar Foundation. I'm also finishing my doctoral degree in the UCL Institute of Education. So continuing on our paper, what we wrote about, we mainly wrote about GUQ students' experiences and perceptions as regards their social engagement in online courses following the pandemic and the rupture that Monique mentioned before, and also building on Reya's point. What we did in practice, we conducted the research after getting the IRB approvals and all that stuff from GUQ, but we didn't share, especially Hany, because Hany works with GUQ while I don't. But it's part of our future plan to share the outcomes and the recommendations with the GUQ and the Arabic Department Administration in GUQ. The research design, in our design, I mean, we went for because we didn't start with an assumption, and we didn't know, you know, how. I mean, it was anecdotal feeling that the students are not engaged, and instructors were saying that students were not engaged in their courses. So we adopted. That's why we adopted the interpretivist constructivist approach using case study. However, we started with a questionnaire that was developed by according to the COI framework, and we sent it over to all students studying in the 2 tracks that Hany mentioned before. I mean, again, highlighting the problem of participation and engagement, only 13 students replied to us. Noting that the questions were open-ended questions. The data we collected was purely qualitative. Next slide, please. The findings that that were sort of that emerged from the data were very interesting. You know, highlighting some of what my colleagues mentioned before, and also maybe different from some others. But generally speaking, there were many challenges faced by our students in terms of their sense of belonging in the course, because for some reasons, you know, like they didn't talk to each other before. There wasn't, like, you know, bonds between themselves or even with the teacher, and also forming distinct impressions of the course mates. It was another challenge here. For example, some of the students didn't opt to operate or to turn on their cameras, and that's why it was difficult for them to form impressions. And they had a challenge with web-based communication as a social, for social interaction, and also for feeling comfortable talking and conversing through the online. It was a challenge for them, especially for students who were not used to this, or students who were working with peers and groups that they never met in person, you know, especially for the fresh students in year 1 and the freshman year. And also related to this was they found it difficult to participate and to interact in the course when, due different reasons that are mentioned in the paper, like, for example, you know, first time to work together, they didn't have enough time to break the ice. And the third group of findings was regarding and focused on the group cohesion. They felt it difficult for them, for example, to disagree with each other and to still build a sense of trust in each other for 2 reasons. Number one, because of the technology, and actually for many reasons. Also, the lack of group work and pair work in the class, because instructors were sort of transforming and moving from the face-to-face to the online abruptly without, enough training and enough preparation. And they did need a lot of training. And also acknowledging each other's point of view in the classroom, because especially for the AFL students of Arabic as a foreign language, they didn't have the linguistic competency, to acknowledge each other's ideas and to focus on the ideas. And that was less of a problem for the Arabic as heritage learners more than the AFL students. Next slide, please. Based on this, the recommendations and implications were coming out of our piece of research is that Arabic instructors should get trained and train their students on using digital technologies and applications, and that instructors should share a feedback rubric with their learners as part of their course outline. And also instructors should teach classroom language, especially for agreeing and disagreeing and function language. And also that they should encourage their Arabic, AFL learners and Arabic heritage learners to create informal chat media like on WhatsApp or Facebook, so that they can socialize and they can create bonds. And these are just some examples of the recommendations and implications. For policymakers, we recommend that policymakers should combine synchronous and asynchronous learning modes in their courses, and they should provide sufficient training and break times for students, and in order to maintain the students and instructors' well-being throughout the semester. And also they should take screen fatigue and the whole sort of health well-being problem related to online education into account. Next slide, please. When we reflect on this, we didn't find enough or sufficient literature on this issue, especially in teaching Arabic, which is the student social engagement in Arabic courses in the Middle East. There was almost like, maybe little to zero. Our next step is to publish the rest of the research, because actually we did conduct we collected data on the cognitive and the teaching presence as well as relates to student social engagement. And also, if we would repeat this research again, we would conduct mixed design research. Thank you so much. Hany, if you have any addition, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mohamed. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you to Hany and Mohamed and to the other speakers. We're next going to consider the cluster of papers on the roles of technology in assessment, and the next paper will be presented by Maxine.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for inviting me today, and also thank you to Brett for his co-authorship on this paper as well. So I should begin really with a little bit about myself and the context where this study is set. So if you wouldn't mind, to the next slide, please, Brett. I started my life as a paramedic in the UK and moved to the UAE. And during that time, I've then progressed to work in higher education, teaching female Emirati paramedics. As Rob alluded to earlier, within the UAE and the Middle East in general, there's been a sustained push by the governments to ensure that there is economic growth and diversification of the workforce. And to do this, like he said, they have invested heavily within the educational initiatives to ensure that their new generation are adequately trained and educated to fulfill that need. As part of this strategic plan, they have produced, they've made available higher education in government-funded institutes, and they've incentivized the learning environment by providing students with bursaries linked to their grade point average scores that they attain. So this means that students become very focused on their summative assessments, because their grade point that they achieve through these summative assessments ultimately means potentially how much money they will get each month. And so it's a great driver for them to be motivated towards achieving good grades in their summative assessments. An unfortunate byproduct of that, for me as an educator within this environment, meant that getting them to concentrate on non-summative assessments, the formative assessments that we're all aware are pretty important to building their knowledge and allowing them to have an appreciation of where their knowledge stands in the scheme of things, was not really high on their list of priorities. And so I began to have a look to see what I could use to engage them in these formative assessments, and particularly within students within these incentivized learning environments, what would work for them. But as Sebah alluded to at the beginning of this presentation, there wasn't really much research out there within the MENA region in general as to how to motivate or get the students to engage in such formative assessments. And so I had a look around, and there was this tool which was being used quite a lot, this digital game-based platform, which, if you haven't heard about Kahoot, it's, you know, meant to be a fun, interesting, motivate students in a game show format where they could answer questions and appear on a podium, a virtual podium that is, depending upon how quickly they answer the questions and how accurately. So I decided to implement this within my classroom, but actually I wasn't really sure whether or not this would work. There was no really information that put it into context where I was going to use this tool that would actually say whether it was going to be effective. Concerningly, I had read one paper which said just a little bit about the fact that females might not be as receptive to this modality as their male counterparts. And more worryingly as well, that maybe some medical domains might not be best suited to this. So I decided to set out and investigate whether or not I could use this tool, and ultimately whether it would benefit me to motivate my students to engage in the formative assessments. Next slide, please, Brett. So this is really what I did. I decided that I would alternate between the different assessment strategies. And this was a little bit before COVID hit, so we were still able to use the paper-based assessments. So I gave them paper-based assessments one week and then a Kahoot quiz the following week. And then at the end of it, I decided to ask them how they felt about each of these different modalities and which one they found actually helped them and motivated them to study and engage with these formative assessments more. I had seen in the literature that Kahoot would motivate students outside of the classroom to study for assessments because it was such a competitive environment and they wanted to be seen on that podium in front of their peers as being the top performer. So I thought that this would really motivate them, but that's not actually what I found. I did conduct some semi-structured interviews and I used activity theory to help contextualize the influences that might be going on with this environment and to gain an overall picture of what was actually influencing their use with this technology and influencing how they felt about it. What I found, which for most of you working in the MENA region who have students who are involved with GPAs and bursaries and stipend, that they will also already appreciate that there's a high level of anxiety towards these GPA related tasks. Students become a little bit transfixed on what their GPA is and really tend to cram for these end of semester tests. So any assessment that I gave them that looked similar to this type of test, i.e. the paper-based assessment, had a significant influence on their level of anxiety. So the students described when they used the Kahoot platform that they felt less of that anxiety. Another surprising finding which we found, which was really, I think, contextualized to here within the Middle East, was the influence of the community had on how well they engaged with these assessments and the influence that the community had on their perception of their GPA. Students talked about how they were concerned about what other members of the community would feel about if they failed in a paper base compared to on screen in this virtual environment where it wasn't so important. Interestingly, the students also talked at length about it being able to collude and cheat during the Kahoot test. Now, if you've not used a Kahoot or utilized it, it's, you know, the whole class becomes interactive because there's music that kind of stimulates the student to feel a little bit more anxious about answering quicker. And so within this environment, they easily can look, what did their colleague put, because it's different colors, or they can ask each other, what did they put? So the norms and the rules of that classroom were completely changed by Kahoot, opposed to it being a very silent, solitary environment where they were just transfixed on their paper and answering the questions themselves. They then become engaged with everybody and would debate the answers and argue with each other at the end of the quiz when the feedback was being given. This also changed the level of and the division of labour. Previously within a paper-based assessment, when I would give the results and talk to them with their feedback about the answers, I would be met without any questions really, and almost a silent classroom. With Kahoot, they would interject, they would argue with me. The rules and norms of that classroom were completely changed. They felt quite vocal and able to challenge what was being said, which really was allowing them to construct their knowledge differently, opposed to a superficial surface layer where they were recalling facts and regurgitating them. They were beginning at a deeper level to debate and argue those answers between themselves. As a result, they describe these times when they actually challenged these norms in the classroom, where they cheated or when they challenged my answers that I'd give them, as memorable moments which enabled them to have better recall when it came to the summative assessments. So what they said was, in the summative assessment, I recalled this piece of information because I remember a time when I cheated during this Kahoot quiz, and now I remember this piece of information because I cheated. So that was quite interesting as well within this environment, that Kahoot enabled them to memorize bits of information which previously before they probably would have found incidental and forgotten about. Overall, their perception of this module to begin with was that they were very intimidated about the effect that this pharmacology module was going to have on their GPA. And this was really playing on their mind. At the end of the assessment and the end of all these assessments, they talked about how they had a newfound interest in pharmacology and positively liked me a bit more because I hadn't made it as difficult. So, you know, there's a plus there for everybody. Next slide, please. So really the take-home message from all of this was that Kahoot did transform this learning environment within these incentivized learners environment, and it enabled them to engage in non-GPA assessments. Not how I imagined though. I imagined this would motivate them to study more because they wanted to be competitive and be on the podium. What it actually did was change the way that they studied within the class and the way they learnt within the class. They weren't interested necessarily in studying more for the Kahoot because they found it a game and they didn't think that this was as serious. They didn't feel that their assessments were as important because they weren't on the paper base for their community members to view and judge them on. So it completely transformed the way they learn because they were also then learning through collaboration. So similar to, I think, what Monique touched on in a few slides earlier, a few presentations earlier, I feel that this really highlights the fact that learning is influenced not only by what goes on in the classroom and the technological interventions we use, but also external factors, because my students described how their peer pressure and their family pressure was also influencing the way they felt they needed to work for their GPA, which I think is probably quite specific here to the MENA region. So what do I see for the future and the projection for where this paper could go? Well, I'm hoping that similar to Sebah discussed at the beginning, that people will begin to look at the wider social, economical and social cultural aspects within this community here, and that we will begin to think about how the community can influence the learners here within this environment. And finally, we might also think about whether there are some tangible benefits to cheating and collusion. Now, I say that on the part of my students because they would like that to be an outcome, that we would begin to measure that it's important that they cheat and collude, but obviously I'm not advocating that. So thank you.
Hi, hello everyone. Very happy to be here, and it's lovely to see so many familiar faces after quite some time, and enjoy all those presentations and very informative presentations that happened before. My presentation today, my paper actually is about an online speaking assignment that I designed for my students, and it had its own specific issues. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. But first, a little bit about myself. I'm currently working with Hamdan bin Hamad Smart University in Dubai. I've been working in multiple situations, different universities, multiple situations, and there has always been something that I needed to overcome, like a challenge of some sort. And that's how I developed my research interests. And it's because I generally, in the general sense, I found that the solution is in flexible pedagogy and ubiquitous learning. One way or another, that would eventually, I'd find the answer there. The context of this particular paper, I was teaching in a local university, a semi-government university, and the fishery level, they had a women's campus and a men's campus. I was teaching in a female students, and I was teaching speaking skills as part of the IELTS preparation course. Now, to be able to well, the paper is about an online learning set of assignments that I designed for my students. And what got me interested to do the research is the amount of resistance I found from my students, why they didn't want to do it. I had to motivate them and then motivate them again, and I had to convince them to do it. And I was thinking to myself, why, what's happening? I mean, I wanted to find out what was wrong with how they perceive, not wrong, I mean, what was in their perception that was preventing them from doing the assignment. So my paper builds on existing literature in the sense that I looked at the literature that looks at teaching approaches for IELTS speaking skills in particular. I looked also at the literature on voice recording web tools and platforms, and which ones to use, which ones more reported as user-friendly and so on. And then I also researched some barriers on the use of web tools, both international and barriers in general everywhere in the world, and more specific to the Middle East region. The gap I found in the literature was that there isn't much on how technology enhanced learning fits with specific cultures of the world. And we cannot, and what I came to learn from experience and from the little research that's available is that not everything fits everywhere. And I'm sure people would agree with that, because any technological, let's say, tools or affordances, they would carry the culture of the makers, and then having them applied in a different culture there would be some sort of a conflict one way or another. And that's what I came to learn when I did the research. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the problem, I don't want to call it really a problem. The issue was that there was insufficient time to practice in class. Students, I mean, in a big class, and with students with low language proficiency, they need a lot of input in order for them to be able to give the output that is required of them. So as we were preparing students, there wasn't enough time to have each and every student have enough practice. So I thought a sensible thing to do it, well, one way of doing it is to have them record their responses, and then they collaborate, share their different responses to different questions, and then that's how they end up practicing and learning from each other at the same time. But there wasn't enough time in class. Another problem was that this particular design was being resisted in class, and I needed to understand why. And what I don't want to call a problem is the culture. It's not a problem, but it's the specific situation of the place where you have to fit any intervention you'd like to design for your students, which is the Arab Islamic culture. The university announces that on its own website, saying that the university adheres to the Arab Islamic culture, and they have this general encouragement to everyone to adhere with the culture. So this was the context. I used mixed method because I was the teacher and the researcher. So whatever responses I got from my students in the survey, they wanted, I wanted to reduce the bias. So I didn't want to be influencing their answers because in the survey always, my survey came as in everything was good. We loved the assignment. It was wonderful, but I knew better. I mean, if that was the case, then why did they resist it so much? So that's why I wanted to do the interviews, to go in depth and pick on the underlying issues. And then the core findings, well, students generally perceive the online speaking assignments as beneficial. They all liked it. They said it's good, it's wonderful. But then they identified a number of challenges, which then I characterized as technical, motivational, and cultural. There's technical issues they just didn't want to bother and deal with. They had some motivational issues. We had some students who just didn't want to do more. I mean, they'd come to class, they do whatever practice is there, and they didn't want to go home and do extra practice. And then to me, the interesting part was the cultural aspect of it, which I will show in a minute. Next slide, please. Thank you. You might want to just click away all the boxes, please, so that it all comes out. Thank you. Yeah, so the first stage of the assignment was to introduce the IELTS speaking prompt. There will be different prompts introduced. So we will have a general discussion in the class, a bit of brainstorming, and then students in their own groups. Each group would be dealing with a different, no, please back, yes, thank you. Each group would be dealing with a different prompt. They would sit together, they would brainstorm. I'd be going around and helping them with ideas. There'd be note-taking, and I encouraged them to write a script, but I didn't. It was an optional step to write the script. Class time would barely be enough for that stage, and then after that, when they go home, each one individually will articulate their answers, the answers that they prepared, they've recorded, they've listened to themselves recording it, detect issues and mistakes they were able to identify, and then do it again, record again. And this was the cycle. And this cycle was identified by students as the most challenging and the most beneficial as well, because they eventually learned from detecting their own mistakes. And then they would post it. Interestingly, I used VoiceFed as well for this assignment. And then with VoiceFed, I also used SoundCloud for both applications worked well. When they complained from technical issues and errors with VoiceFed, then I introduced SoundCloud. But again, there were some other technical issues. Then when they share all their information, they share their oral responses, students would learn from each other on how they respond to different topics. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, the general reflections on this learning experiment is that as I said, what I was investigating is actually not the online speaking assignment itself. I was investigating what was happening behind the scenes. I mean, why did students resist it so much? The general implications, what I found out is that, as I said, there were technical issues, motivational issues, and some cultural issues. General implications of the findings is that there are misconceptions among us teachers. We assume that all students are tech savvy. They will be able to deal with things. They're not necessarily tech savvy, and we need to give them some help, at least not to all of them, or design some sort of a support system for them where they can help each other with technical issues. The context-specific implications were that students do have lower levels of intrinsic motivation. They always needed that push to do a little bit more, a little bit extra, because they need to do more. Otherwise, they won't be able to pass on to their colleges and universities specializations. Now, the thing with the culture, what I found out when I started digging and asking is that with some students, the situation was even the situation was even brought up among family members, and they had to discuss whether or not the student should record her voice and post it on the internet. And even to me, being part of this culture, and I understand this culture, even to me, that was something a realization, like, why did you have to have this discussion with your parents? And she said, yes, because this is posting publicly, and I don't post things. I mean, this is like, they saw it as a form of exposure to the outside world, which is something they need to rethink. And then the discussion between the parents was, the father was against, and then the mother came up with a solution saying that if this recording is private and if it's only shared with the students, with your teacher, if you trust your teacher, if you trust that it's not going to go public. And mind you, this is not a video recording, even this is just a voice recording. So if you trust that, then you can post. And she did. Another student refused even to do that, even a private posting. So she sent me her recording on a WhatsApp, as a on WhatsApp. Now, okay, this meant that she could practice more, which is fine. But then the issue is that the peer learning aspect didn't happen. If everyone's going to have their recording privately, then how are they going to learn from each other? And well, because it was a cultural issue, I have to respect it, of course, and I have to respect students' privacy, and I can't. I mean, we all should. So this thing got me thinking about the compatibility of the learning experiences that we design for our students with the culture, and this also led to me thinking, well, I'm a female instructor, and I was teaching female students, and I found this issue happening. I later then did another research of culture, and then it turned out that even male teachers would find it more difficult to implement technology with female students. Situation would be different with female students. I didn't have a problem with my male students when I was teaching them. It was fine. I didn't get that's why I didn't research it when I was doing it with the male students. It was fine. So gender issues come up here. And that's basically in a situation like the United Arab Emirates, where most of the teachers are expatriates and coming from different cultures, coming to teach in culture-specific situations. These are things we need to think about. Always reassess, assess and reassess, with globalization and everything that's going on. The culture is changing, but still we need to check our parameters and our boundaries and what we can do and what we have to think again before doing. And that's basically my paper. Thank you.
Yes, assalamu alaikum, good afternoon. My name is, I'm very glad to be here, part of the event today. My name is Halah Nasseif. I'm a lecturer in MIS in the University of Business and Technology in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. I have just earned recently my PhD in e-research and technology enhanced learning from Lancaster University. The theme of this paper, next slide please. The theme of this paper is all about technology and using a new technology in higher education in Saudi Arabia. It's interesting time in Saudi Arabia because a lot of changes and developments, economic-wise, development strategies, industrials, women's rights, and especially now also with the focus of the paper in technology in education. I know, as mentioned by Rob and Maxine, it's a time for investment in education in the region and also economic growth. And that's what the Saudi vision, the 2030 Saudi vision, focus on aspects of technology, innovation in education. So I'm introducing, I thought of researching a technology that was not used at the time of the research about e-portfolios. I was interested to know about the perception and acceptancy of the students' perspective, the faculty's perspective, and also the higher management in order to adopt a new technology in campus. So literature that I've researched is more about technology in general, acceptance, a lot about learning management system acceptance. The e-portfolio ones was related more about assessment, like for example, in Zayed University, they had to examine e-portfolio with accreditation requirements in assessing learning outcomes. In the University of Princess Noura in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, they a different aspect of e-portfolio, they focus on association with e-portfolios with professional development. In Turkey, Ankara, they used e-portfolio to assess, use it as an assessment, test assessment or self-assessment. Next slide, please. So for my case, I wanted to adopt a theoretical model, low technology acceptance model, to test using e-portfolios in a case study at UBT, the same university I'm working in. And the technology acceptance model, there's a lot of models in technology, and a lot of literature review used the diffusion of innovation model or access model, and a lot of them use a combination, and they use a lot of different external models. I kept it simple to use just TAM, but since the e-portfolio was not used, and a lot of students did not know also about e-portfolio at the time. So I've used the same TAM model, but I adjusted it. I adjusted some of the elements in it to be more flexible to technology that was not used per technology that was used. For example, like testing a perceived usefulness, I've mentioned it's a potential usefulness, and I had to do some kind of introduction about e-portfolio. So like using my research methodology, a mixed method, I built questionnaires based on this adjusted TAM model. Questionnaires was filled by 35 faculties and 215 students. I did a semi-structured interview with 3 UBT senior managements. They were the vice rector and the dean of the college, and also the IT director. What's the most interesting about the case study that I've done? I've conducted a focus group I nominated the 20 MIS students to actually create their e-portfolio, during the research study. And it was really one of the interesting outcome of the research. In general, the findings was more about the importance of having awareness about any new technology being introduced, because if faculties and students are aware of the benefits, aware of the development of this and what kind of results it will improve in their learning assessment, they will be more eager to use it. And definitely from the questionnaires, from the interviews, the importance of having enough training and support. So the focus group, my students, they mentioned that it was really very nice to use. They used OneNote, Microsoft OneNote, the already resources available at the university, and they were very enthusiastic about creating the e-portfolio. But the challenge they had, they needed more training to how to be more innovative, how to create more graphical design and make it look really nice e-portfolio. So that's one of the things they really want. So not only training, not only support, but they really need to learn more about innovative tools in designing these e-portfolios. So these, in general, the focus of the training, the support, being innovative. Is there another slide, Brett? I don't know. Yes. So the reflection, yes, part of introducing new technology, or the effect it has on professional practice and the education experience for the students, the faculties themselves. There's a lot of research outcome results on each top changes or elements that they can go through the e-portfolio. The sample of e-portfolios the students have done also available online in the article. But the interesting thing also about the adjustment, the simple adjustment done to the TAM model to allow other institutions that they can use, have a new technology, they can use some of the adjusted model as well. And what is interesting also, what I can say last, I'm not going to keep you long, but it's basically as mentioned with Karl and Monique about the sudden transformation in this COVID period. This will be an interesting something to research, because the Saudi Ministry of Education at the time, when we faced with emergency learning, we called it emergency learning at the time, switching from face-to-face to online, they provided us with emergency plan, strategic plans. They didn't enforce it. They kind of say this is what is recommended in terms of lecturing and contacting, communicating. And this is the list of assessment that you can do, you can use in terms of assessment. And one of those tools was e-portfolio. So it will be interesting now, like a lot of universities and schools even have used this. It would be interesting to research this further in terms of impact and implementation. Thank you very much, and take care.
Okay, thank you very much to everybody. We have -6 minutes for our plenary discussion if we go by the scheduled time. So I know we have one question sort of waiting in the wings from Don Passy, and then we'll open the floor, see if we have a few more. So Don, do you still have your question? And if so, could you direct it, if it's directed to a particular speaker, please? Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Christopher. Thanks all. I mean, just to say, first of all, congratulations to everybody with regard to this special edition. I think it's a very, very welcome special issue. So congratulations to the editors and to all of the authors for putting this together. And for me, context has been hugely important in terms of research that I've done over a long time. I won't tell you how many years, but it's a long time. Okay. Context has always been one of the key things for me. So this, I think, is really important because you're looking at context in all sorts of real terms. So I suppose my sort of question or questions would be this really. What comes out of your research that you would say characterizes MENA, the MENA region? You know, is there something different there that you're finding from your research that isn't, for example, found in other regions of the world? What is it that's coming out so strongly that would characterize that? Because I think that is important in terms of understanding teaching and learning in specific contexts. And then I suppose the other question I'd pose is, I was interested to see that many of the conceptual and the theoretical frameworks that you were using were very Western. Now, that then sort of draws this question: do Western frameworks draw Western answers? You know, so is the choice of framework actually important here, and is something that's needed in essence a rethink about the frameworks? Do we actually start to need to think about MENA in terms of methodological approach rather than starting from a Western approach? Now, I know there are two questions and lots of things out of that, but those were questions that really came out to me, you know, because I think this whole thing is really, really interesting. And I think that you drew those things out for me very, very strongly. So I sort of asked that of any of the editors or any of the authors. I'm not here asking anyone any specific questions. Okay.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. So just a nice simple one to get us started. Is there anybody that would like to take a swing at this as a first, either the first part of the question or the second part of the question? Is there anybody who would? Mohamed, yes, please. I see your hand up. Please.
Yes. Thank you again to the organizers and the editors, and thank you, Don, for a very smart question. Okay, I mean, when we say MENA, to be honest, you know, MENA hasn't been represented completely in our special edition. Like, for example, you know, North Africa, I mean, the Maghreb and these countries, I see that most of the research conducted by our team here comes from, when we say Middle East, mainly from the Gulf states. This is number one. Number two, again, you know, your point about applying Western frameworks and collecting Western sort of insights. Okay, I would call it human knowledge, to be honest. You know, because, like, for example, you know, the use of English and technology and the use of English in science, you know, it's predominant. Conducting the research with Hany on teaching Arabic as a foreign language and Arabic as heritage, you know, this has made us think of, you know, like the special characteristics of Arabic, for example, the diglossic situation of Arabic, the fact that there is one modern standard Arabic and there are a variety of dialects, Arabic dialects, which has created a different layer and an increased layer of difficulty and challenge for our students, because the Arabic they study in the classroom is different from outside of the classroom. So these are my quick insights and answers for very, very smart questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We turn to Rasha then, please, for her perspective on the questions, and then from Rasha we'll turn to Monique. So thank you, Rasha.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Don, also for the question. My answer to the first question is that culture plays a very important role here, And that's why, for example, in my research study, I designed a visual tool in order to elicit participants' responses, in order not to make them embarrassed while talking regarding the trainer's knowledge. So this was very important. Secondly, regarding Western theoretical frameworks and their uses. So I think that how we use the theoretical framework is what matters. Our perception regarding each theoretical framework and when it is contextualized makes the product different. So it's not about being Western or not, but it is about how we use it in context. Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Monique, please.
Great, thank you. I love this question. I think that I'll just say two things about my teaching. My own research, aside from the technology in teaching, focuses on American race and ethnicity in various periods of history and in culture, literature, urban studies, and a lot of different topics. I've also taught around the world for the last 18 years. So some of the same classes, like the Harlem Renaissance class I was talking about, I have taught in Palestine, in China, here last summer and last semester, and then also in Mexico City. And the thing that gives me great joy about constructivist collaborative learning is that I can't carry my American narrative through the beginning and end of a class. I'm always inviting students to share with me what is their perspective, what do they know, and I think the collaborative technology tools especially help that kind of project along. I will say in the project that I talked about today, and it is in the paper, about the George Floyd protest related to a protest in 1917 in New York, my students started talking in that collaboration and beyond in the semester about Tunisia, Morocco, Palestine, Egypt. They were telling me about color differences and racism that really went far away from Harlem and New York and America. So I think what comes out of the research to me is that the MENA region is diverse, that student voices in the MENA region are unique and particular, but that the students also see themselves connected in their own way to what's going on elsewhere in the world. They put themselves to protests going on in France. They talked about Algeria. So I think that there's a lot in that category of MENA that's unleashed when we let students collaborate and their own voice comes into the classroom.
Oh, thank you very much. We'll give anybody else the chance that would like to address either of the two parts of the question. Indeed, any of the editors as well, if they would like a chance. Going once, going twice, gone. Okay, great. In that case, thank you for the respondents. We'll, I know that Brett has a question. I have a question as well, but we'll open it up to the floor maybe for one or two final questions from speakers, from participants, from audience members. Again, if you have it directed to anybody in particular, if you could let us know. Is there anybody who has a question? Okay. Brett, would you like to ask yours?
Yeah, okay. I actually have loads, so let me just pick one. Okay. I mean, let me pick something I'm actually interested in rather than something that will just try and make me sound clever. Everybody, nearly everyone, has talked about the fact that there isn't that much research on this in the Middle East or the MENA region, right? That was a common starting point. But another common starting point is it was so difficult to get participants. I would say, you know, like quite a few of the presentations included things like that. I mean, not every presentation was focused in quite the same way, but where you were trying to recruit people, nobody kind of wanted to participate, right? And there was another thing about motivation, about students are only motivated to do certain kinds of things. So what is distinctive about doing research in the MENA region on TEL? That's actually my question. It seems there's not much done, but is that partly because it's not very easy to do and people don't want to do it or don't want to participate in it or whatever? So what are the challenges that people have faced doing empirical research, particularly in the MENA region?
Anybody would like to have a go at Maxine? Yes, please. I think your hand is up. Actual hand, not just digital hand.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
I think one of the challenges is obviously receiving ethical approval to, first of all, do whatever research it is that you want to undertake. But also, secondly, it's certainly where I work at the college I work at, funding isn't made readily available for you to undertake the research. So anything that you do is therefore in your own time, and that's also has to be factored around.
How is
that? Also has to be factored around your workload, which makes it pretty difficult to devote your time completely to the task. So I think those are really the main challenges that we face on the ground, actually undertaking the research. Research participants, I think Rasha AlOkaily discussed a little bit about their concerns about their voice being heard by other people, they're concerned about protecting their identity. And so I think that this also impacts a little bit on them wanting to participate. But that's about building trust and developing a research institute and a research ethos within the community, I think.
Thank you very much. It's interesting. I've had a fairly similar experience with this, working with a colleague of mine at our university. A few years ago, we began a piece of research looking at the challenges that research students faced in publishing, because we had the same thing that everybody's expressing. Oh, there's no research, there's nothing in my region, I can't find anything, I have to rely on the Western. And you had that conversation with students saying, well, if every one of you published, you know, my university's been around for 15 years at that point. So let's say you graduate 100 per year. If only half of them publish, and every university does that in Dubai, we all of a sudden have a wealth of material. So we went through this process. We were doing a piece of research to try and identify the challenges doctoral students faced in publishing. We had very low numbers of participants. We had very low numbers of responses. We had real difficulty getting it published. So a very meta experience of the whole problem. And it is, we were also highlighting the fact that language is a problem, you know, language of understanding the process is a problem, you know, that sort of research culture Maxine's talking about. And then the issue that Don brought up, which is Western. A lot of instrumentation is Western, a lot of theory is Western, a lot of comprehension is Western. And I think for me, what's come out of all the presentations today is precisely this context. And even going back to Sebah's conversation, the need for us to develop our own understanding that reflects the practice that's going on in our region. And yet we're still playing by the rules of the international game, because otherwise we can't get in the door to be taken seriously, but we still need to sort of evolve something here. And so it's I've really enjoyed all these presentations, sort of hearing the human side to the research that's been undertaken. So yeah, oh, sorry, Reya, I see a hand up. Sorry. Yes, please. I've stopped babbling now.
Thank you. Another thing to add to what you just said about publishing, another problem is that even if you have a good sample population participating in your study, it's not easy to publish in Western journals about the Middle East. And most of the times we get rejected just because it's not relevant to the scope of the journal. So what CTEL has done is open up that opportunity for us to publish there, because most of the time I've been trying so hard for many years, and always the rejection is that, oh, it's not within the scope of the journal. So what is the scope of the journal? Although they are very broad when it comes to describing the criteria for publishing in their journals, but it's the Middle East thing that they are not interested in. And I think that's what CTEL is covering. This is the gap that CTEL is covering right now. So that's what I have to say.
I do wonder if, you know, as we now have the sort of the ranking system more regional based, and whether there's more sort of awareness of activity that's going on, maybe we'll start to see trickle of interest in what's actually happening in our region. So we'll see. Hany, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I would like to add one thing that Mohamed mentioned, that we had 13 responses for our questionnaire while we send it to more than 200 students. And I had this conversation with one of my students, and he mentioned that at the beginning of this working online, they received many questionnaires from the university, from each department, from every single professor in the university. So we sent 200 questionnaires. It ended up with 13 only. So this is the one reason for the less participants in our research and in our study.
Yeah, the wonderful survey fatigue, absolutely. Yeah. Exactly. I noticed the time is now getting on for 5 to the hour, as Brett says, whichever hour is approaching you. Maybe I'll turn it back over to Brett to sort of finalize the event and bring it home. Is that okay? Oh, there we go. The screen stopped. Great.
Sorry about the delay. Whenever I share my screen, all the buttons move, so I can't see where I can unmute myself anymore. So yes, thank you. Basically, all that remains is to say thank you. Sorry for the slight overrun in terms of time. We'd like to very much thank all of the people who are involved in producing the journal. That's, of course, the authors who submitted their work, but equally the many peer reviewers and other people behind the scenes. As it's a lot of work to bring something like this together, as a few of us know. And basically, we'd like to end by saying, please do look us up. So this is a collaboration between the Centre for Technology Enhanced Learning at Lancaster, the address being shown on the screen, the Centre for Research in Digital Education at the British University in Dubai, address on the screen. And please do keep an eye on the journal, Studies in Technology Enhanced Learning, for future special issues. By the sounds of what we've just heard, maybe we need to do regular special issues on the Middle Eastern context to give outlets for these kind of things. And most of all, of course, thank you to you all for your interest in coming today. And we hope you found it enjoyable and stimulating. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Ramadan Kareem.
It was lovely to be here.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Ramadan Kareem. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.